Welcome to Qatar Financial Centre, behind the business series. We are here with Mr. Thad, our Senior Advisor at Financial Service Office.
Well, thank you very much, Sheikh Fahad, for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Why was Qatar in a better position relative to other GCC countries at the start of COVID-19?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I think there's really three factors that are going to be answering that question. And one is really about the proven resilience and adaptability of Qatar. You know, in the last 7 years that I've been lucky enough to be here, we've really gone through three crises. The first was in 2014-15, when we had a dip in oil and gas prices. And the second crisis, of course, was even more impactful, and that was the blockade, the onset of the blockade in 2017. That really had a big lasting impact on the resilience, on the connections that we've been able to make with our partners. You know, not only did we really strengthen our self-reliance on production at home, but we also turned Qatar Airways Cargo into the largest cargo operator in the world. And now, with the most recent crisis, the COVID-19 crisis that hit our shores in the early part of this year in 2020, we really learned and drew from those lessons, those past lessons, and that's how we were able to nimbly maneuver and really adapt on multiple fronts, especially with the economy and our fiscal response. But you know, I think the second factor that really contributes is our stronger sovereign financial asset position, both on a per capita basis and also as a share of GDP relative to our peers in the region. And so this access to especially liquid reserves, so Qatar has about 186% of GDP in terms of its sovereign financial asset position. And you know very well, Sheikh Fahad, that half of this is in liquid terms, and this can be directly drawn upon, for budgetary purposes. The majority of QIA assets and investments are overseas, but there's also a substantial amount that's domestically focused. And in the past, when it was needed, when it was required, some of the dividends from those investments were directed towards the Ministry of Finance. So I think that's a large factor for the credit rating agencies, for them to be mindful of, and that's part of the reason why we've been able to retain this strong credit rating throughout this year. It's also important to note here how we as a country were able to react to COVID-19. So I think, you know, in March, when the numbers started to go up, many people, including us, were working from home for a significant period and able to really endure this partial lockdown that came into effect. And at the same time, hospitals and dedicated facilities were able to service those people who were infected. And Qatar's Ministry of Public Health should be congratulated.
What makes Qatar's current economic recovery stronger than of its neighbours?
Well, I think we can read a lot as a leading economic indicator from the Purchasing Managers Index. And that really tells us that Qatar's economic recovery is all about a sustained recovery in new business. And that is unmatched in our region. So I see, for example, over the last 4 months that we have had a large increase in new orders, and those continue to be so, whereas in the UAE, where we had an earlier recovery in June of new orders, that then tailed off. And the same pattern you can see in Saudi Arabia, where you had an uptick in September and then a drop off again in October. But to be fair, there's also a base effect that comes into play, and that's because of this partial lockdown where we had a closing in of a substantial amount of economic activity in the second quarter, and therefore the third quarter you have a large rise. The Purchasing Manager Index only covers 4 non-energy sectors, and for Qatar's economy, of course, LNG, crude oil, condensates, and related products are extremely important. And we have been very fortunate because this diversified production suite that we have here in Qatar has been in continual demand throughout the COVID crisis. So we have only had to shut in about 1.3% of that production over the period versus our neighbors in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, that have had to shut in 10% of crude oil production during that same time.
And what about the deficit?
Well, this is also something that has been very impressive, I think, in terms of the adjustment. Here we've had a sharp curtailment of current expenditures, including the wage bill, and that has resulted in a first half deficit of only 1.5 billion riyal, or about $400 million. So for the whole year, we're looking at a negligible budget deficit of 0.4%. So this has been very impressive and has really had us draw on our previous experience. So we still have a continuation of capital projects, and that's been something stupendous. Even after the blockade, even during the current COVID crisis, not only have we had a completion of these projects on time, as you say, but even ahead of time for certain major projects.
And how will Qatar economy continue to outperform its neighbors in the long term?
Well, we have a lot of promise over the next decade to be growing at a fast pace, and those are really for three primary reasons. One, as we mentioned, the preparations for the FIFA World Cup 2022, where we anticipate to host 1.5 million visitors. And as we had mentioned, in terms of fiscal outlook, a lot of these projects, big infrastructure projects, are being completed, and those will not only be in service of the games themselves, but also will be adapted for touristic use, for all sorts of commercial uses in the years ahead. The second major factor is really the North Field expansion, and that's going to be looking out from 2025 to 2028. This is 64% increase in terms of LNG export capacity that's going to be brought online really up until 2028, according to the latest industry estimates. This will obviously expand not only the amount of LNG, but also the condensates and the derivatives that are available for processing and for export. And lastly is the onset of two free zones. One of them is adjacent to the airport, the other one to the seaport. Well, I see them being extremely instrumental in advancing this vision and, in fact, executing it. I see them working together. So the Investment Promotion Agency, working with both the Free Zone Authority and with Qatar Financial Centre to attract different sets of clients. So for the Free Zone Authority, I expect them to house lots of light industry, warehousing, logistical, chemical industries. And for us here in the Qatar Financial Centre, I see us housing both financial institutions and professional services. You mentioned the national vision, and much of that has to do with economic diversification. So we see that here before our eyes every day. That's something in terms of us attracting quality, high-end, value-adding services to the state of Qatar's economy. So that all is driven by an opportunity set. So for example, for the financial institutions that you and I interact with, they're acting on commercial opportunities. For professional services, Qatar Financial Centre offers a very welcoming, nurturing environment for them to be located, set up shop, and grow both in the domestic market.
And that's it for today. Thank you, Mr. Thad, for sharing your insights on Qatar economy.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and for having me today.
Thank you so much. So we are here in Qatar Financial Centre, open for all new businesses. Thank you.